a big part of what I've been invested in recently is that I think that we've kind of, in some ways, exhausted ways of talking about it, right? We can kind of talk about racism is in the DNA of every structure in America until we're blue in the face, right? And somebody will try to pull that out and say, no, it's not really about race. It's about these other things, and these things happen without race being part of them, right? And so I think, you can state that and you can kind of argue that, and then there's certain ways that you can show it. And so the work that I've been doing as part of a series that I've been calling Counter Narratives is kind of looking at the lineage of racism in journalism, right? And so if you point to these particular periods, typically you can also kind of pull up reportage during that time that shows kind of how we've moved through, journalism. The goal of it was to kind of, you said, did you say racism is about self-interest in a way? Did you say that, Ibram, is that your?
Oh, of course. Definitely.
Of course, right? And so you think, when journalism began at kind of the beginning of time in the US, I mean, a good portion of the population, they were slaves. They weren't being interviewed. They weren't part of these articles, right? Journalism that was being produced was just to service a particular need. And so the work that I do where I kind of reimagine New York Times articles is I'm looking for the particles that are left over from that racist history, right? How can we talk about when newspapers were invented, the classified sections were really kind of either how you could buy a slave, you could search for a slave that had escaped, or you could sell one, right? I usually, when I give a talk, kind of walk through a series of slides that go from kind of the early 1800s up until pretty much Mike Brown, right? Where you can kind of see this evolution or not evolution of particular terms. You can move from, the 1800s of the guy was selling 400 slaves, right? He was looking to sell 400 slaves to 1941. I want to say I think it's Life piece where they try to walk you through distinguishing the difference between, they say Jap and a Chinese, right? This is kind of post-Pearl Harbor to kind of 1994, the darkening of O.J. Simpson's face to, if you want to talk about the 90s and kind of Anita Hill, we can also kind of just dial back a couple of years and think about the Central Park Five. And if you go back to 1937, you can actually find literally almost the same language to describe the Scottsboro Boys, right? So how can we follow that lineage, right? And I think usually the best way to do that is a visual project. If you can kind of walk people through these examples and kind of say C, and kind of there's a through line there, I think that's an important way for us to think critically about how you can't actually extract that, right? It's in the DNA. Even of our kind of most revered publications, you can see these things, right? You can look and you can pick them out. I have this work where I actually insert white American into the title, and people think that the newspapers would never do that. And I'm like, no, they would never do that. We don't identify whiteness as a race, right? I'm intentionally kind of racializing people, right? And there's some shock and horror to that because we are all, or most people, right? I don't believe it's possible, are waiting for this kind of post-racial society. There's going to be a place where we go where we're like in the skeeches and the snitches, where we're all just kind of mixed up and we don't know who's who. And I don't actually believe that. I think it's complete bullshit, right? And so one of the reasons that I do that is because it does kind of get you to look differently at people who actually operate very invisibly. Like white people are there, but you don't really see them, right? And so, and part of that emerged from a study that I read about in the 40s where this guy was trying to figure out how do we assign race, right? How are we identifying people in newsprint, right? And so he did this study about a month's worth of a paper. I really wish I could remember exactly which paper it was, but and he wants to see when we mention race in headlines. And so over the course of the 30 days, he finds that there are 39 articles that talk about crimes committed by black people. And in 36 of those articles, Negro is in the headline. And so then he finds that during that same 30 days, there are 131 articles that talk about either white people involved in court cases or white people involved in crimes. 0. No mention of race, right? And so I'm really interested in kind of how you can see that now. Like how does someone get the term American? How does someone get another kind of coded word, right? And so for me, that's how I try to talk to people about how race persists and how you can't actually remove it in this way, right? It's a stain.
You want to show, don't tell.
Yeah, you want to show. I feel like